connected. Yeah.
Recording in progress.
Well, hello, everybody. I'm Meg Terrell from CNBC, and I'm very happy to get to welcome Paul Hudson, the CEO of Sanofi. Paul has been CEO at Sanofi since September 2019. Previously, he was the CEO of Novartis Pharmaceuticals since 2016. And before that, he'd worked with AstraZeneca and GlaxoSmithKline. In his personal life, Paul is a dad of 3, and I'm told an ardent Manchester United football fan. I don't know anything about that sport, but I know that that might be a controversial piece of information about Paul. So I will turn it over to Paul now and look forward to everybody's questions after his presentation. Paul, over to you.
Thank you, Meg. Thank you very much. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. Yeah, I'm an ardent Manchester United supporter. Not been a great season for us, and I'm optimistic about what happens next year, I can tell you. Yeah, proud father of 3, 2 at college in the United States, and but got them all home at the moment, so I'm lucky with that too. Great to be able to join you all and to share with you some thoughts on how we're doing at Sanofi and how we're making progress on our long-term plan, and perhaps even more importantly, to show how we weave in our corporate social responsibility and the sustainable nature of our long-term planning. I'll say it later again, but I think it's worth saying right up top that our commitment to the environment, to diversity, and to just simply doing the right thing has never been greater, and is also just fundamentally built into everything we do. And hopefully we'll explain that. If you don't feel like that's coming across very well, I'm sure you'll tell me in the Q&A, but I'm very proud of the work that we're and the progress that we're making. So let me get straight in to where we're heading and pass the forward-looking statements. I think you've seen that before. For those that don't know the company particularly well, just a little bit in a nutshell, you know, we're about 100,000 people strong, roughly 50-50 in terms of gender. We can do better at representation. We'll talk about a little bit later on that. Global organization, fully integrated, 69 sites, 21 R&D sites, and structured into 4 BUs. We made a small adjustment to how we were structured in 2019 when we launched our strategy to make us much more accountable, much more directly connected to the R&D engine, through our BUs and through all the way through to execution. And we think now I look back in 2020-21, that was a really good move for us. So we have let me see it, out of the 69 sites, all of them stayed open during the pandemic. And I think it's worth mentioning, and again, maybe we'll touch on it later, people volunteered to come to work at our sites because we're in healthcare, we're purpose-driven. And when we asked people to put their hands up if they want to come in on weekends and do split shifts, because we had to distance everybody, pretty much every single hand went up. And so we were thrilled with the commitment our people made, both in our labs and in our manufacturing, which kept us completely in supply through the pandemic. For those on chronic meds, same on vaccines, and indeed the same in maintaining our R&D. We kicked off 4 phase 3 programs on multiple sclerosis right in the middle of the pandemic. And we did them and executed them, at least the beginning of them, faster than we'd have ever done that before as a company, using new tools, data and digital things that we hope will stay. So very pleased with how we come through the early days of the pandemic, and a little bit more about Sanofi in a nutshell. What we can share with you, we've had Q1, which was a great quarter for the company, but we can also just look back at full year 2020. For those that are trying to get to know us a little bit better, we grew 3.3%, which was extraordinary under the circumstances. Just can't tell you how proud I am in how our teams have shown up. It's a company full of entrepreneurs and problem solvers and puzzle solvers, and they really brought their A game to help us get done what needed to get done in the interest of patients. Our split of revenues is quite interesting. We're perhaps a little bit lower in the US, a little bit higher in emerging markets. Quite probably one of the best companies in the entire industry in emerging, including China, balanced through Europe. And of course, with some of the challenges the US may face under the new administration, we could talk about that later if you like. We think we've got the right balance in our portfolio in the United States as well. So, you know, 2020 was a good year. We're shaping up well. We've given guidance for 2021, which we think could be an improvement over 2020. And I think the transformation is fully underway. And if I think about that from my own perspective, you know, I became CEO in 2019 in September, launched the new strategy in December. The virus was identified by the WHO in January. We started working on it in February, and then we went into lockdown for a year, on and off for a year. So to have taken on this role and to have seen the team grow and to tackle the transformation of the company during a pandemic without missing a beat says a lot about the company and how cool the people are here. And again, very proud of them. So moving on a little bit, you know, the work we did in late 19, laying out our strategy, it was not overly complicated. And what my own experiences in pharma have been that it's really about executing. It's about being aligned, disciplined, and executing. We split it down into 4 basic pillars, and I'm going to go through them with some detail. But upfront, a focus on growth, because that's important. It also shows that people who need our medicines are getting access to them. About how we prioritize our portfolio. We're a very broad portfolio because of our history, and prioritization has become absolutely essential in that. Leading with innovation and transformational medicines, first in class, best in class. We had quite a few Me Too late medicines underway, consuming a large amount of R&D budget. We really had to think about how to free that up to go and do things that we really think could change the practice of medicine. And as to efficiency and productivity, with the opportunity around data and digital automation, machine learning, AI, we get a chance to reinvent how we work a little bit. And that's incredible for us. We'll talk later about some of the savings we've made that we're able to reinvest in R&D. But I think, we would be very proud of how we're doing that. It's not just the savings, it's about what it's like to work here. I think we're making it better simply to work here as a user of our IT and our infrastructure. Of course, it's a lengthy process, but we're underway, I think. And then, of course, to reinvent how we work, trying to help with our engagement, trying to increase accountability, trying to make sure that people feel they're contributing and they understand how they connect to the overall strategy of the company. We know that unlocks some discretionary effort. We know also that if we focus a bit more on how we're represented in that, then people feel like they can be what they can see. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. The work we did through 19 and beyond was incredibly important work. If I'm to look back honestly, the hardest piece of work we did since I joined was around our commitment to society in all forms. And it wasn't hard because we didn't know what the buckets could be, for example, around carbon neutrality. What was hard was that we asked our executive committee some fundamental questions and said, we don't just want to do what everybody else is doing. And I'd been to some Davos meetings and there were great meetings, but there was a lot of carbon offset talk, a lot of tree planting, a lot of conscience offset, if you'll indulge me. It's not that it's a bad thing, but I think we felt we're a healthcare company and we should look at, yes, do that too, but what could we do that nobody else is doing? And we asked three fundamental questions. How can we have the greatest impact? Where are we unique in what we can do? And how can we scale that and sustain that over time? And how can we embed our long-term commitments into our long-term business strategy? Because I think we've all participated in the opportunities to come up with new ideas, and they often become a poster by the elevator and people are very pleased, but the work begins to decay over time. We wanted to build it so significantly into our strategy that it became inseparable, if you like, just how we are, how we operate, because we think that's the absolute best way to ensure that these things live on. And as we get into the headlines, affordable access, there are plenty of countries that can't afford medicines. So how are we going to make sure that essential medicines get to those that can't afford them at a massive scale? We're doing that for close to 700 million people on this planet. What can we do in R&D that breaks new ground, particularly in the unmet needs, sleeping sickness, for example? I'll talk about that later. And also pediatric cancers, where the research we think can be accelerated. In terms of efficiency and sustainability, I come back to carbon. We talked about that. Renewable, the approaches we're taking, reduction in plastics. And I think we're making great progress. And I think we've got some very strong commitment from the leadership on that. And then beyond the workplace itself, if we can even call it a workplace anymore, it's much more about being representative and about the inclusive nature of that representation. And I think we've set some bold goals for ourselves. But I think it's just the minimum expectation, frankly, now. Whenever I meet new talent, they're always saying the same thing. What are you doing for society? They're judging whether they believe me or us. And they're looking around the building as they walk through it and saying, do people look like me here? And, we have work to do, right? We have work to do on that. But I think we're going to make great progress. So what we laid out back in December 19 was three fundamental strategic priorities. Dupixent, for those that don't know, is a monoclonal antibody, IL-4, IL-13, used for immunological disorders like atopic dermatitis, horribly debilitating skin condition, asthma, eosinophilic esophagitis, prurigo nodularis, a long list of illnesses. But what you should think about most is where the body is sort of attacking itself, Dupixent can step in and help provide relief and often a life free from symptoms. So We know that that has amazing effect in terms of quality of life for patients. And we know that on the back of that, patients first, we have the chance to grow to being a 10 billion plus medicine. And we put the plus there because already when we made this strategy, we were ahead of, we was late 2019. We went on to be 3.5 billion in 2020. And of course, Q1 this year was already suggesting that we're going to significantly outperform on this 3.5 this year. Why do we like that? We like that because, of course, it means patients being successfully treated and the opportunity to reinvest in R&D, which is important. For our vaccines business, sure, we'll get some questions on that a bit later, but we predicted high single-digit growth through 2025 on the CAGR, and it was the right thing to do. We've had a record flu season last year. We're likely to have a record flu season this year. Perhaps one of the hangovers from the pandemic will be more open-mindedness to vaccination in general, but in particular, influenza that still claims 500,000 lives a year and could be as simple as just an injection with very few local adverse events like a sore arm. So we think that that could grow again after the pandemic. And then the pipeline, we advanced 12 phase 3 projects in 2020. We're just starting. I really like how our pipeline is coming together. We'll talk a little bit about what that looks like as we make trade-offs, as we stop doing things, for example, in cardiovascular and diabetes, and give us a chance to reinvest. So I've touched on Dupixent. Why do we believe we can go from here to greater than 10 billion? It's a game changer. And I've worked in and around immunology a lot in my career and been over 30 years in the industry. This is just one of those medicines that the side effect profile is so clean and the efficacy is so fundamental and profound for patients that it's hard to see a better profile. And we are building this out like a pipeline in a product. We're doing it the right way. I inherited most of this work, thrilled to see the quality of it. If I've done anything, it's just to juice it a little to make sure that we're moving with the right amount of speed, but high quality work. You can see as these new indications for Dupixent come online, we unlock these patient potentials, often huge. Excuse me, in the 10 billion plus, we did not include COPD. You may or may not know there are no biologics in COPD, and it's a huge and debilitating unmet need. And we're going to, we hope, be one of the first, if not the first. And then lastly, on the right there, China, we were the fastest ever approved medicine in China. We were the fastest to reimbursement, I think, ever in China. Plus or minus, I think I'm roughly there. And we did all of this in the space of a few short months and weeks. And already we've seen over 1,000 patients treated with Dupixent. And it's just the beginning. If you, to be honest with yourself, there's close to 1 million patients who are struggling and would benefit. In China, we have a lot of work to do in market development, but it's incredible. You can see at the bottom, we grew nearly 74% in 2020, and we're well on track. As for our vaccine business, well, I touched on it a little bit, but two things to point out. One would be RSV. There's many of you are probably even on this call or Zoom who've had a child, a newborn who has picked up this respiratory syncytial virus, and it's responsible for 50% of the newborn admissions into the emergency care setting. It's frightening for the baby, of course, frightening for the parents. For the first time, we just read out data where we'll be able to reduce that by over 70%, which if you think about those parents and those little infants, this is just completely a revolution. And it's a preventative. So if you have a baby that's born in the RSV season, you'll be able to get an injection, very safe. And if you're born outside the season, you can discuss with your physician. For us, we're set up to be the standard of care. And while it's a monoclonal antibody, it'll be positioned like a premium vaccine. So our goal is the whole world can benefit. And I think a company with our heartbeat recognizes the importance of that. And then a little bit more on flu, as we talked about earlier. With the emergence of mRNA in COVID-19, we've been in mRNA since 2018. Our flu program starts the middle of this year. And let's be clear, in the flu business, you can't have those local side effects in the arm or 1 or 2 days of fever. You have to be placebo-like or as close to as you can be. You also need to beat the efficacy bar that's already established, which with the high dose is closer to 70%. So it's not going to be an easy ride for mRNA. However, we'll be there too. So if it's a success, we'll participate. And if it's not a success, we'll continue to go on how we operate with influenza. So we're excited about the long-term potential for our role in vaccines. We talked a little, and we include this in our growth section because we're a company that grew from 300 acquisitions over 30 years. So we have an extraordinary local presence in most of the countries around the world, over 170. And, you know, there's lots of things that will change and modernize and accelerate in the company. One of my prime responsibilities is not to lose the magic that actually made this company so great. And it's that ability to be local and to care very close to where the patient and the health system is. I think it allows us to be the leading, if not one of the leading companies, to bring forward essential medicines at very low or no cost in 40 countries, 30 medicines, to make sure that those that need those chronic medicines for illnesses get treated. And this is where we start to overlap, really, our business agenda, fine, but we recognize we have a responsibility in cardiovascular, and diabetes, and TB, malaria, and cancers. And you're gonna see us do this in a way that gets access for those patients. And it's less about us, frankly. It's a non-profit unit. It's more about those that need it. So to the pipeline, which, you know, is what I spend a lot of my day focused on. You know, we declared these assets in December 19, and we said, you know, it will take 2 or 3 of these to be successes and to be mega blockbusters for us to take a transformational leap forward in our business shape, to be great for patients, but to also provide a good return for investors. We know that balance, we know that responsibility. We presented this in 19, and we've learned a lot since then. I've shared some of the Dupixent news. For those, I'll touch on it later on amsenestrin, but for those that don't know, you know, we shared data last Friday at ASCO. I think we're going to be the backbone in hormone related breast cancers, which is the majority, by the way. And we made progress in hemophilia. We've had a couple of setbacks with venglustat, where we tried to be super bold in areas where there was no proven pathway. Excuse me. Now we'll focus almost entirely on lysosomal storage disorders, where we're very strong and we know the pathway. So we're excited about venglustat. I mentioned RSV. The last one on the list is tolebrutinib, and we've got the first brain penetrant BTKI. And out of the patients that completed our phase 2b with really great efficacy, we believe that the majority, more than 98%, are still on the medicine in an open label follow-up. So we know we have a medicine. We know that it's really helping in progressive disease, and we look forward to sharing data as we go forward. But we think crossing the blood-brain barrier is going to be essential, particularly at pharmacologically relevant levels, and we're on track, I think, to do that. We've added to our science. You know, we've got some cool assets. They were the ones we shared in 2019. But, you know, we're not standing around. We've added, you know, acquisitions in Thorex, Principia, Kiadis, Kymab, and most recently Tidal. And we've tried to stay aligned to the areas where we are committed from a therapeutic area perspective, so that our path to accretion is sooner and faster, fully deployed commercially, fully deployed clinically, so we know how to do studies. We can move so fast, and we're moving at a speed that the company hasn't moved at before. And then we've augmented ED from Chimera and beyond right to CX. And I think we're starting to see how these pieces fit together. I'll share a little bit later, but I think it's been well received, the work that we've done and the speed we've done it, because people can see these are early stage assets or early to mid, which is really where our gaps were. They make sense with our pipeline and portfolio. And it's where we don't have to keep reinvesting because we're already there. And we have an ambition, a bold ambition, to be a leading immunology company and back in oncology. One of the reasons why we're confident about our future role in immunology is we've got what will be the foundation Dupixent for most immunological driven diseases. But we've gone around it because we know how these markets play out. We know how heterogeneous these patient populations are. So bringing in the BTK rilzabrutinib from Principia, adding the anti-OX40 ligand from Kymab, working with Chimera, the IRAK4. What we've tried to do is get the right mix between subcutaneous and oral in combination after Dupixent, before Dupixent. Dupixent is the backbone, don't get me wrong, but there'll be patients around the edges that need a different approach, and there'll be also illnesses that go broader than that. And so we want to not wait until the end of the decade to start asking, what do we do after Dupixent? We've started early, we're doing incredible work, we understand type 2 driven diseases, and if anybody that joined us on February the 5th at Capital Markets, you'll have seen we laid this out in some detail, and I think this and plot we're doing around it that we haven't disclosed yet is going to be pretty exciting for everybody in our space. And onco, we're back. I would say we're not trying to say we're a powerhouse. We're not trying to say we're a winner. We know what we have with Libtayo and Sarclisa. We keep adding indications. They're in very competitive markets, but we also know that it's not enough on its own. And so with the IL-2 from Synthorex and with the progress that amcenestrant, the SERD, is making, I think we start to understand how we put together a business in oncology that's satisfying unmet need and can help move the group performance, which is important to us from a capital allocation perspective. A lot of people want to be in oncology, but you have to do it credibly and meaningfully, get the right data, do the right work. And we mentioned, of course, CEACAM5 there. We're leading first in class, could be significant in terms of mechanistically. And we move on with Tidal into mRNA in oncology. On amcenestrant, just maybe a final comment, which would be, we're going to be first, we're likely to be best. We've managed to hit a sweet spot. If you look at all of the SERDs next to each other from a molecular design perspective, we share a similar approach to achieving efficacy. But the difference would be that we've done it in a way that doesn't increase the side effect profile, and that makes us unique. So it allows these women in the adjuvant setting ultimately to be able to be on treatment long term without compromising their lifestyle and achieving the desired efficacy. And I think that's our goal. That's where we're going to be. We're going to be first. We're generating the data. We announced last week the adjuvant setting studies with the big cooperatives in the US, and I think it's going to be pretty amazing. But this is what I love about how we built our strategy. We go from oncology to sleeping sickness. Many of you won't even have heard of it. You won't know of the 65 million people that are at risk in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, because our attitude to innovation in the areas where we choose in our CSR strategy to win, because remember, we're unique. What can only we do? Sleeping sickness is one of them. We've been working on it for some time. You can see from the chart the incredible work that people have done long before I was here. But to get to an oral treatment and then to push on to a one-shot oral treatment, we think we can save hundreds of thousands of lives ultimately. And I think we should have as much passion about that. There won't be a business model. It's not necessary. But this isn't just carbon. Carbon is essential. But we have to repeatedly ask ourselves, what can only we do that is the right thing to do and that is sustainable? And this 20-year partnership with the WHO, I can see a long-term commitment with that as we tackle this. And it's absolutely, eradication has to be our goal. We've been saving a bunch of money as we go, and we're very decentralized. We've missed some opportunities for economies of scale, category management, vendor selection. We've been able to pull out 1.7 billion in 2020 without really missing a beat. We've done it by applying pressure appropriately to partners, third parties, and we've done it by being more careful with what we spend and how we prioritize. To be able to reallocate 1 billion of that into R&D is pretty sensational. If you'd said in 2019, we're going to put 1 billion more in R&D and we're going to self-fund it, you'd have been a bit suspicious. We've been very diligent on this, and we think there's more to come, by the way. We really believe that we've got a lot more to reinvest, which means that we get to really accelerate our pipeline and do it in a way that doesn't compromise our financial commitments too. And that's the two horses we ride, and we're very happy to do it. So then back to manufacturing, I mentioned we have 69 sites, but it's sort of not good enough just to have sites and to be operating very efficiently. It's complicated work. I think you've heard from other presenters. It's not easy. We've got some bold goals, though. I visited many of our sites in the early part when I joined as Sanofi, and they're characterized by these huge solar arrays outside of them, and our ability and commitment, whether it's from the beehives we have on the roof and the pollination objectives, the meadowland we create, right through to the renewable energies around our sites. We're thinking systemically about the ecosystem we operate in. And then inside the site themselves, we won an award for our site in Framingham, in Boston, Mass, Waltham, for being fully digitized, and less people, of course, but getting hundreds of millions of data points a day. And the goal ultimately is real-time batch validation and quality approval, rather than waiting 1, 2, 3, 4 weeks plus. We want to be able to see those medicines come off the line and be released within minutes or hours. And data is going to play the big part in that. And then lastly, we're not shy on the tough calls. And I think people said about Sanofi, it's French, of course, we're proud of that. But that we were a bit scared of making tough choices. But, we created a new company. It'll IPO next year, first half of 2022. We have put a number of our manufacturing sites in there that make API. We make API. It shouldn't be our fundamental job. Plus, it shouldn't be our job making API for third parties. We can create more value for those that invest in us by having the IPO in the first half of next year, Euro API. In the pandemic, though we started this work earlier, a lot of people saying to us, supply resiliency, health sovereignty, particularly in Europe, needs to come under a sharper focus. So what are you going to do? And we're really excited about this. And it shows how flexible, how good we are at making tough choices. But I'm excited. We're reinvesting in vaccines in Canada, Singapore, France. We're doubling down, and we're doing it without missing our financial commitments. So when you look at the scale of some of these projects, certainly from CapEx, these are big and meaningful. But I think we believe that we're actually going the right way, and we can do something that simply hasn't done before in some places, but certainly not here. And we can do it with our own resources on many cases. So as we get a bit closer, to the end of the journey, when we set the challenge as a leadership team to take on some of these things, 100% carbon neutral car fleet, 100% renewable electricity, and we put some deadlines on it. Don't read the deadlines as we spend a decade navel gazing. We are determined to beat all of our expectations, but some of the work that we do in China takes a little bit more to get there, and some real fundamental rethinks. But we need to measure it, and we need to set ourselves that goal, and I think we're doing it. To remove plastics, for example, from vaccines is a significant step. It's probably overdue, but getting there by 2027 with all of the regulatory approvals and the machining takes the time. But we can't stop. If it's not going to be us, then I'm not quite sure who it's really going to be. And then when we get to our people agenda, particularly, I've always been very committed to the gender equality in developing leaders, developing my own successor, doing things that reestablish that parity, because we live in a 50-50 world, male, female, and there's no reason why we shouldn't have a proper representation. And we'll stick to gender for a moment. We have a goal to be, of our 2,000 top leaders, to be 50-50. And we know that some of our female leaders, rightly or wrongly, make choices to off-ramp or take different routes because the company itself hasn't been flexible enough. Now, with the new world post-pandemic, I think we're going to provide more opportunities for more flexibility, for more leaders to grow. I think it was tragic, actually, how when male and female partnerships were at home during the pandemic, it was often assumed by the male that the female would also do her job and do more around the home. Not me. I'm just telling you the stories and anecdotes, and we could see it. It's not acceptable. So we're going to do great work on this, we believe. Beyond gender, I've been getting reverse mentored in some detail on race and inclusion and appointment of our Black talent and brown talent, and we're not where we need to be. I don't think really anybody is, frankly, and it's a long-term game. And I was talking to our ERG in the US last Friday, a good session where I asked them to review our strategy. They loved our strategy, but they say all the time, you know, it's great, but it's going to take too long. So we have to be much more rigorous around diverse panels, diverse candidate slates, really loading the deck so that we get an equally talented person, but one that's more representative. You know, it's an everyday responsibility for leaders and managers, and I think we have to do an awful lot to get there. So we don't take it casually. Likewise for our LGBT, group, we need to be a company that fully represents society, so that people can bring the best version of themselves here and feel included, and can see others like them, because that's the society we live in. And I may be the middle-aged white sort of 53-year-old, you know, that is not what people want to see. But my job, the way I see it, is to create an environment where my job and all of the positions can be for everybody equally in the company. I'm not saying that we haven't made it not equal, but I am saying I think we haven't put enough energy. And after George Floyd's murder, personally, I've gone on my own learning journey to try and make sure that I'm understanding the struggle more deeply, because I really don't think I did. I don't think many do. Anyway, I think with that, I think I'm, whoops, I think I skipped on there. Maybe some some closing comments. We haven't touched on our COVID-19 vaccine, and I think it's fair of me to say that I've never been more proud of our team. We were delayed 5 months, and people were disappointed in us. You know, we took the hardest technology in, and we took it in because we didn't know if mRNA would work. And if mRNA had failed, because it never worked before, then we would have regretted. And I said to the team, no regrets in the pandemic, no regrets. We don't know what the future holds. So what you can't tell me is we'll wait and we'll start the work later, because you just don't have time, and time is lives, as everybody know. I'm thrilled that mRNA worked. Absolutely thrilled at scale. We have a great proven platform, but it can't move that, but moves very fast. We've done in 2 years what would normally take 10. But it's proven that in a pandemic, it will be mRNA first, because it can move so fast. Longer term, we will see with non-pandemic challenges, but that's what we see. I've never been more proud of the people that showed up, the people that worked every day for a year, that have brought through great phase 2 data and phase 3 underway. And because we're a little bit later, we will do studies, booster studies on top of other vaccines, because everybody's talking about when they're getting their second dose, and we'll be appearing just when everybody's talking about what are you going to take for your third dose. We'll play a part. It's never been about the money. It's only ever been about helping. And so really proud how fast this company moves, how I've seen it at its best, how quickly we're transforming, and the progress we're making in our pipeline and our execution and our diversity and inclusion initiative. So there you go. That's covered nearly 2 years' work in 30 minutes, but very proud of what's happening in this great company.
Wonderful. Paul, thank you so much for that presentation. We are already getting some great audience questions coming through, so I'm going to go right to them. And I encourage all folks who have questions for Paul, you can post them in the Q&A tab. Paul, the first question is kind of picking up where you left off on COVID-19, asking, in your point of view, what are the top lessons learned and breakthrough ideas from the COVID-19 crisis we can leverage in new drug development?
So I think we had a meeting. I was fortunate enough to be at the G7 health minister meeting last week, and we talked about some of this. And I think we learned that we can collaborate, that this triple helix, as one stakeholder said, of industry, government, and academia. When the pressure's on with a common enemy, we can really do incredible things. I've been in the industry 32 years. I've never seen anything like what has happened. I think it's extraordinary and it's purpose-driven. I can also tell you, myself, my peers, everybody were around. Not at any point did people talk about the cost. Everybody just said, push all the chips in. And for us, you know, I touched on it earlier, you can't wait. You don't know what's going to work or what challenges from a safety perspective others will find. So you just have to not blink. And I think that's a moment where the industry has shown up beautifully. The regulators also. So people don't know this. 10 years to develop a medicine. A third of it is waiting for a reply from the FDA or the EMA. So when you write to them, they write back to you, you set a meeting, that can take 9 months. And people don't sort of get that. In the pandemic, that was taking 60 minutes. But one of the reasons it was taking 60 minutes was because the risk benefit was known. People were dying real time. So regulators were happy to go a little bit over the tip of their skis because they knew that the risk of getting it wrong was not as big as the risk of not moving. So when we look at the future, what do we learn from that? Well, you're not going to do that in influenza or places where there's already treatments, because you can move faster, but you'll expect the same standards on safety and efficacy that exist. But you can do it, I believe, in unmet cancers. You can say, look, in pancreatic cancer, what can we do here? How can we change the game and move at that speed to allow you, because the risk benefit is there for everybody to see. People are dying. So where it won't be everywhere, but I think the biggest lesson learned, I hope we keep, is the honesty and collaboration between companies, governments, and academia right on the big issues and stick together to solve them once and for all, rather than everybody doing their own thing. I think that's real. And I hope we do. I certainly, am a champion for that.
Well, our next question, I think, kind of ties into that a little bit. And it's sort of two questions in one. How do you communicate the message that shareholder value is not exclusive with drugs accessibility? And the part two is, how do you work with global South countries where most people can't afford expensive drugs? And I would kind of put that in the context of what we're seeing with COVID right now, where there's such inequities with access to the vaccines.
So a few things. I think that, we as a company, tried to lay it out. Maybe I wasn't very clear. I value sleep and sickness drug discovery and development progress equally as I do with Dupixent in eosinophilic esophagitis. Same review, same scrutiny. Most people on this call have never heard of sleeping sickness. So what we have learned and what people need to understand is we can't do everything everywhere, but the places we choose to play to help those who can't afford things or where there is an unmet need, we have to have the same rigor, discipline, energy, and enthusiasm. But we need to be agnostic to the resources and just do it. Whereas we'll debate them on other parts of the pipeline. We have to say, no, we've chosen this as a pipeline. We're going to eradicate a disease. So the funding will always be there. Now let's do it properly. And often, most people think polio has been eradicated. It hasn't. And we provide polio vaccination in Europe at a very different price than we do in the developing nations. They can't afford it. It is what it is. So we have to step forward and say, sorry, we'll find a way to get it for you. And we just accept that tiered pricing may be like, oh, why should the developed nations have to pay? That's what people say to me sometimes, by the way. But that's how we balance it. And we should have absolutely no embarrassment in doing brilliant science, pricing it appropriately for the country, and making sure that nobody is forgotten because of price. And we're doing that everywhere. I've touched on the 40 countries, 30 medicines, all essential medicines on the WHO list. Nobody's going to ever ask me about that. Or my own people do, because it's part of their DNA. And we have to find a way to do these things. I think the trick is do a bit less, do it properly, and do it so that you'd be proud of the work that you do. Same with innovation. We'll give 100,000 vials away of rare diseases just to those who need them in emerging markets. It's not perfect, but it's the right way. Maybe, Meg, you were alluding to the IP waiver conversation and vaccines and how these things. And if we thought that would get vaccines available sooner in Africa, of course, we would look at anything. It won't. It takes 5 years to build a vaccine facility, 5 years to get it approved and calibrated to a standard that people would expect. So forget it. It's not going to help. What else can we do? Get doses into COVAX, make sure there's plenty of doses, make sure some of them can be at 2 to 8 degrees so that they can be delivered in some difficult supply chain environments. There's so many things that we can do. It's not the political stuff of the waiver. That's a different type of shot at the industry. It's more about doing the right thing. And this company, particularly because of how it was created, will uphold standards for us on that.
And you just mentioned the waiver question was a shot at the industry. I wonder your thoughts on the current administration and the fact in the United States and the fact that they embraced the waiver idea, perhaps knowing that the situation is much more complicated. But did you take that as a shot at the industry? And what does that signal, do you think, about the administration's approach to the drug industry?
So I take it as a shot just because I think it's very hard to execute. And I think it's an emotive subject, because for most who don't follow would assume, well, surely that will make it easier for access. It was never about access. So therefore, it has to be more about how it shows up, with industry and pricing and other things. Same thing, Meg. All we care about for the markets that don't have access is to get them access. We don't think that debate helps. In the US, with the new administration, all we've cared about from the get-go is, do you know how drugs are priced? Do you know that 50% of a drug's price goes to a third party? Express Scripts, CVS, it's part of the pharmacy benefit manager. You have a medicines coverage probably yourself as a person in the US, and 50% of the price of drugs is gone in discount to the third parties. They perform an essential role, don't get me wrong. They manage formulas, they do different things. These things are not well understood. If you ask me what the issue is on prices, I would say it's what the patient pays out of pocket in a pharmacy when they walk in and somebody says that copay is $100. And they're thinking, I got other things to do with $100 this quarter, I might not take my medicine. That's a bad outcome for everybody, not least the patient. So where we try to help with the administration, where we try to help work in partnership with the pharmacy benefit managers, is what can we all do together to solve the out-of-pocket for patients? If you just want to hit price, then we'll say to you, do you fully understand what you're asking? But if you want to focus on out-of-pocket for patients, then we're at the table. Simple as that. And and we've said that many times, but it's hard to get it executed. The US health system is quite complicated.
That's an understatement. Another question from the audience we have here about mentorship. You mentioned you were reverse mentored when talking about people. What does that mean?
So there's maybe on that occasion I mentioned it. I've been mentored twice meaningfully in my own journey, or 3 times actually. First on Vol and Gender a number of years ago. The considerations, classic would be 2 guys deciding not to offer a female talent a position because they think because she has a young family, it will be making it awkward for her to say no. So that's wrong on every level. So hearing to people share those stories with me helps me watch out for that in the future, and people share real stories. So the second time was on data and digital. I'm not from that generation. I have an iPhone, I love it. But, if you ask me about how to write an algorithm, I'd tell you I would struggle. And so I'm getting reverse mentored on data so that I don't miss any opportunities for the company. At least I know enough to be dangerous and ask some good questions. And then lastly, on George Floyd, we had some sessions internally. It's pretty hard to hear, frankly. And I spoke to one of our Black talent in the US who said to me, Paul, let's put it like this. You're driving down the highway and the police pull in behind you. What goes through your mind? And I said, well, I think, where's my insurance certificate? Was I going too fast? And he said, different for me. He said, what I think is, how bad could this turn out for me? And I don't walk in those shoes. So how do I have a dialogue? And he was helping me understand the struggle sometimes to get to the door of the office. It's very different to imagine. He shows up in a meeting with me. I'm like, here's a talent. I'm not seeing anything else. What got him there can be very different. So I need to understand that, because how I help, is really important. So, conscious of time, but I think it's really important that I'm mentored on the things that I don't know, because the world is moving so fast, and I need to understand the struggle for others and then do something about it from an action perspective to create a more inclusive environment. I'm a work in progress, but it's my job, so that's okay with me.
Question for you is we're running down just to the end of the session. It's a bit out of left field, but I'm so curious to know your thoughts on this as a CEO. Did you see the news this morning that Jeff Bezos plans to jump on the first crewed flight for his space company, Blue Origin? So he's launching himself into space on the first flight that's going to send crew up. We've been talking about this on CNBC a lot this morning, because there's some question from, what will the investor reaction in Amazon be to Jeff Bezos launching himself into space? And I wonder your thoughts on a decision like that. How should a leader of a company think about a decision like
that? So you're right. It's a bit out of left field, the question, but I can't comment on Amazon and Andrew Jassy or the team and what they think. I can tell you, for those interested or remotely concerned, I have no plans to go to space while I'm in the role. So I can declare that now, and somebody can quote me on that. I have no plans to be in lunar orbit at any point, and I'm happy with the job that I've got. And just getting out of my apartment after the confinement of the pandemic will be huge progress.
All right, Paul Hudson, we really appreciate it. That was a great answer. Everybody should stay tuned. The next session will begin momentarily. Watch for the pop-up on your screen. Paul, thank you again.
Thanks, Meg. Thanks so much. Thanks, everybody.